Welcome to Talk World Radio, a half-hour discussion of politics as if the people mattered. I'm David Swanson. This week on Talk World Radio, we are talking about Iran and the world and the problem of war. And our guest, Matthew Hoh, is a disabled Marine Corps veteran of the Iraq War and former Afghan War State Department officer. In 2009, after being appointed to the Foreign Service, Matt Hoh resigned his post in Afghanistan over the Obama administration's escalation of the war there. He is now an analyst and commentator on foreign and military policy issues. As a senior fellow with the Eisenhower Media Network, he serves on the advisory boards of many peace organizations, including Veterans for Peace and World Beyond War, and is an associate member of Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Matt Hoh, welcome back to Talk World Radio.
Hi, David. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you. I'm glad you're still doing the great work you're doing. We could use a little bit of sanity. You don't have to go back half a century as you probably could, but how did we get into the current mess, in particular with regard to U.S. and Israeli war on Iran?
Right. We could go back a full century. Because that's, I think, where we would need to start, more than that, 110 years or so. But, essentially, I think there's two heads to this. There's two paths to this. One is the reality of the United States as an empire. And this is what empires do. Empires need to maintain their hegemony. They need to ensure their dominance. And so any country like Iran, any resistance organizations like Hezbollah or the Iraqi resistance or the Yemenis or the Palestinian resistance, we're going to face such a war at some point. The other aspect of this is that the United States is a government of legalized bribery. And the United States has sold off, the U.S. empire has sold off its organs essentially to the highest bidder. And this isn't just the case for foreign policy. This is the case for anything. Healthcare policy, agricultural policy, you name it. And so in this case, Middle Eastern policy, the Israeli lobby, particularly the Israeli lobby has always had an influence on American policy, but particularly, say, starting in the 1980s, has really understood how to put both political and media pressure on the United States to have a favorable Middle Eastern policy. There are other aspects of this as well, too. There's also the military-industrial complex. There's the fossil fuel industry. There's a tech industry, right, that benefits from 92 million Iranians who are not on Facebook, who are not on X or TikTok or whatever. So, there's a number of interests here that have their own purposes in wanting this war. And due to our system of legalized bribery, our government decides not upon its own interests or what are the interests of the people, but who's the highest bidder. So you put those two things together, the reality of the American empire, and then all these manifestations of empire that are able to buy outside influence in terms of what they want. And then you combine that with the most malleable president, a president who is completely unanchored, unmoored, who any explanation of him really just simply needs to be he wants what he wants for himself. And now you see these two forms of inertia that have met a president who's willing to do it. And this pressure had been put on previous presidents, most especially, say, George W. Bush. You go back and look at, say, news reporting from 2011, the pressure being put on Barack Obama to launch military operations against Iran, right? But those presidents were smart enough, if you will, to avoid this war. And now these, again, these two waves of inertia, empire and legalized bribery, have found a president who's willing to do it.
Yeah, it does certainly seem like those are big factors, and maybe also the inertia of people in Washington just demanding this since around 1979, and U.S. culture,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
my elementary school singing "Bomb Iran" to the tune of a Beach Boys song, and the
Right.
inertia of all the bases in the region and the world and all the ships and all the
Yeah.
stuff that has to get used. But it seems like,
Absolutely.
as you mentioned, that there was this big push and had several high points over the past decades, and it was stopped and prevented each time. Now it seems to me like some of the factors you have to throw in the mix include just shameless sadism and
Mhm.
dementia.
Right. We essentially, David, have a mad emperor and we have his mad court. I mean, I think this is what we have, and I think very often we get into conversations where we're trying to find some logic, some purpose, some meaning, some method to this madness, and there's not. There's just simply madness. And you have a government that is composed at the highest level of sadists and nihilists. You look at the people who surround Donald Trump. That's who they are. I mean, you look at the way the glee came from the highest levels of our government as the U.S. government, U.S. military murdered what more than 150 people in boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. Just the absolute glee, the joy in it. And so you have this element where you have a government that is being led, and this comes from the top, by a man who is clearly in 25th Amendment territory, right? So clearly not mentally competent to be the president of the United States. And he is surrounded by yes men, by sycophants, by con men and con women who, similarly to the president, they've understood how to climb the ladder in a corrupt American military, economic, and media system, but they're also sadists and nihilists. These people are unmoored. They have no attachment to any real ideology. I mean, some of them do have flavors of neoconservatism, where you can cite that, yes, this is a Zionist perspective or things like that. But you compare that to, say, Donald Trump's predecessors, and those were all men who had uh, institutional loyalty. They believed in the purposes of the infrastructure on the top of which they sat. And Donald Trump has no such thing. So, and I know you've been very critical of all those past presidents, as have I, for very good reason. They all should be in the dock at The Hague for war crimes. But at this here, what we're dealing now presently, our current president, this is something different. I think you can make the argument that the previous president also, there was very much a great deal of evidence to remove him on 25th Amendment grounds, that he was incompetent to serve. But that was also different, though. I wouldn't describe Joe Biden as being mad in the way that Donald Trump is. And this is historical. The type of things we are seeing Donald Trump say are the type of things that Edward Gibbon would write about of the Roman empires in the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. I mean, this is just madness. And so you have this here, and as you say, you see the people around him, and this is why a war like this, they've wanted from the start. You go back, David, to uh, President Trump's first uh, press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu, end of January, beginning of February 2025. And, it's very clear in there. You go back and look at it, particularly you watch it so you can see the tone, you can see the mannerisms. But Trump's affirmation that we will take care of Iran, I'm paraphrasing, was there though. And so this war was going to happen. And it just took them 14 months or so to carry it out.
We haven't even mentioned, and probably for good reason, it doesn't deserve it, but we haven't even mentioned any of the reasons that they've publicly said they wanted this war. Like, we've only talked about the actual real reasons, which usually you have to
Right.
plow through mountains of BS and excuses and justifications and propaganda, and then say, okay, we disproved all that. So why did they really want this war? Now they put so little effort into the lying that we just go straight to the actual reasons. But there has been some minimal effort to recycle some of the familiar lies, maybe a few new ones. What have they told us as excuses, and is there any overlap at all between what they've told us and the reality?
Well, one of the things we see, David, is there's a lot of comparison and contrast, right? Of course, of the 2003 Iraq invasion for very good reason. And one of the things you can say is that in 2003, the United States was led by competent liars, and here we're being led by incompetent liars. I mean, this is one of the things I think that was so shocking to so many around the world, especially, was just the inability of the Trump administration to even have their messaging put together. To even have their narrative established as to why they were doing this when they launched this war of choice, this war of aggression. This was a war they decided to launch on the early morning of February 28th. And they, that first week, and even now, they still contradict themselves all the time. I mean, but, certainly there's been a shift in what they have said they want to achieve, depending upon who's speaking very often. But this idea that this is about the Iranian nuclear weapons program, a non-existent nuclear weapons program. Since 2003, American intelligence services have been clear that the Iranians don't have a nuclear weapons program. They have a nuclear program that they're allowed to have under the Non-Proliferation Treaty to which they are a member. And of course, they, as well as the other several dozen countries that have civilian nuclear programs, have a capability with that to go and build nuclear weapons, but there was no indication that the Iranians were doing so, even though they had enriched uranium and done some other things to make it possible to do. But that's not the same thing as having a nuclear weapons program. So, that's the first lie that's just there constantly. This lie about the Iranians having nuclear weapons. There is also the lies too early on about how there's an imminent threat to the United States, that if the United States did not act, the Iranians were going to attack us, assuming meaning they're going to attack our bases in the American bases in the region. And that was also conflated as well with, particularly with Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, saying that this war was begun because there's an imminent attack on Israel that was likely from Iran. So you just saw a number of things that were said that were simply not true. There was no imminent threat from Iran. Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. And then there's just other purposes as well they've put forward, most especially the idea of destroying Iran's ballistic missile and drone capabilities, which we've seen in the last week change from destroying to diminishing. And so we constantly see these objectives shifting. And sometimes we see the objectives where it is clear that the purposes are, or supposedly the purposes are about the nuclear program or about the missile and drone program. But then other times you'll see where those aren't included in the statements as to why they're doing this. Of course, removing the Iranian government, overthrowing the Iranian government, regime change. It was certainly an objective. The first purpose, the first mission, the first strike was to kill Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. And you've seen conflicting things from the administration over and over and over again. Just the other day, I saw a clip of Donald Trump where at 9 a.m. he says there was no regime change intended. And then 7 minutes later, he says we carried out regime change in Iran. So you have this where it's just not even the American officials are contradicting each other, but, which again shows a startling inability to have just message discipline or have some narrative constructive or, have their story straight before they begin this crime. But the other thing too is that even among themselves, like individually, they contradict themselves quite often. The president being the one who does it the most.
I'm really Matthew Hoh. I'm really floored by this comment of yours that the difference here is that they are incompetent liars, whereas in 2002, 2003 they were competent liars. Because in 2002, 2003, in some polls, you had a slim majority, at least for some months after the thing started, supporting the madness. And I wrote a whole book called War is a Lie, trying to argue to people that the difference between the 2003 war and virtually every other war in history was the incompetence, that they were just really bad liars. And there weren't any other wars that weren't based on lies. The liars were just a little more competent.
Yes.
And now here we come down a whole new level from 2003 to 2026. And we have to make this distinction. Well, actually, now they're vastly more incompetent. It's like,
Right.
Is there any level beneath this one? Because I would almost have said it doesn't even count as trying. They're so incompetent now.
That's right. And when I say the Bush administration, 02, 03 were competent liars, that they had their story straight. They did it professionally, and people did see through the lies. And there were journalists and there were activists and there were academics who were screaming at the top of their lungs that they were lying. Um, in the media establishment, the political class, of course, went along with the war. Yeah, I've looked at the public opinion polls recently. It was in the run up to the war, about 50 to 60% consistently supportive of the war. But when the invasion actually occurs, you start seeing that number getting above 70,000, so above 70%, close to 75%. And then popularity ratings wise, in April of '03, George W. Bush's public approval rating is 81%. I mean, and then he was reelected 18 months later, and all we can talk about that. But yeah, I don't know if there's anything, uh, you know, I guess it would be just that you do get to a point where they don't even try to lie. And that's something that you said before that I think maybe many of us felt a bit refreshing is that sometimes they don't try to lie. Sometimes they drop it. Sometimes Donald Trump says this is about the oil. If we open the Straits of Hormuz, we can take it and then we can make a fortune. Right. I
Right.
mean, so sometimes there is that, other times he'll say he doesn't care about democracy. He's going to appoint who's in charge of Iran. I mean, we saw this with the Nicolas Maduro kidnapping with the Venezuela operation. The the willingness of the president to say he didn't care about democracy, that this was about the resources, this was about putting his people in charge, and it was a bit refreshing because, as you said, we don't have to spend any time cutting through the lies. We don't have to spend any of our time making the case why what they're saying is a lie. We can just go straight to the argument, just have the conversation about why what they are doing is wrong. Because we spend so much of our time as we talk about this war, unpacking, disproving, having people understand that what they're being told are lies, and it takes up much of the time we could spend explaining to people why this thing is wrong. So it is a bit refreshing when they're just honest about it.
Or they're either so bad or not trying that people didn't buy it, and the polls weren't there before or even
Right.
after it started. They didn't go up either, and so people, for whatever combination of reasons, maybe all of us screaming. My throat is still sore, from screaming at the top of our lungs through all these wars. Maybe a few people have heard, but for whatever reasons, people aren't buying it. I'm also struck, Matt Hoh, by the lack of secrecy. I mean, I don't have any military expertise other than trying to oppose it as a sickness, but to come out publicly and say, well, we might do this, we might do that, we might have
Hmm.
this secret mission where we'll go in and steal the uranium and so forth. Like, how is it secret if you're tweeting it? Like, there isn't even any secrecy about anything, right?
Right. I mean, I think we can be generous and say this is imperial hubris, right? And that's being generous to say this is their arrogance that is showing. But a lot of it is just the incompetence. I mean, I've said this consistently. The idea to take Iranian islands in the Gulf or to seize Iranian coastal centers, that was a topic of discussion for much of the in the media space until that F-15 was shot down and the pilots had to be rescued. And now, that discussion there, this idea that we're going to take, particularly, say, Karg Island, where Iran exports 90% of its oil from, yeah, to openly say it like that over and over and over again, I don't think in the history of the world has ever been a military operation to discuss like that openly. And so you would naturally think, well, then, okay, then maybe this is a distraction, maybe they want to try and get the Iranians to think that we're going to attack Karg Island and we're going to do something different. But no, I don't think that's the case because, again, there's a competence thing here. And you just look at the degrees to which the United States prepared for this war, the fact that it didn't have all the forces in the region. You can just look at the example of how come those Marine Expeditionary Units weren't there already? Why are they showing up weeks after this has occurred? Why were there no bunkers in place on the bases for soldiers and airmen and sailors and Marines to take cover on all these bases? All these bases throughout the region had to be evacuated. And it's only, in the fourth week of the war, so you're seeing that the Central Command's asking contractors to deliver mobile bunkers to protect personnel. I mean, we could go on and on and on with the ways that you'd say the American military wasn't prepared to carry this out. So that's just one aspect to show how incompetent this has been. But certainly, this idea of saying openly, we're going to take Carg Island or we're going to go and steal the uranium. This to me is also a degree of the arrogance that they have, the bravado. I mean, the Nicolas Maduro kidnapping gave them such a shot of confidence, right? I think it made them feel that no one could stop them. And so I think that's why they've been so brazen. That's why they've been so open. That's why they've been so bold. And yeah, they believe in themselves. They believe in their purposes. But also, too, now we get back to now we're trying to explain away something that I think is very similar here. It's like a Occam's razor type of quandary where the simplest answer is the correct answer. And you essentially have a mad emperor and his court full of nihilists, sadists, conmen, etc.
Yeah.
I think that's the reality of it.
And when they've decided that they don't even need to try to get a slim majority to support them at the start, and then get a bunch of U.S. troops killed, and from then on keep the support at 40-30% by saying, we got to kill more people in honor of the people we've already killed, that sort of thing, as they did to drag Afghanistan and Iraq along. They also don't care about pretending that there's anything legal or moral about it. They're just openly illegal, just openly immoral. And so there's no need to lie to us, but there's also no need to get any money out of us. I mean, up until George W. Bush, whenever they would have a big war, they would tax us and slash our social programs. There would be some sort of financial impact. Now
Right.
they just slash the taxes on the billionaires further and the corporations further, and just invent money out of thin air. And maybe they do slash some social programs, but they don't care about that either. So aren't the usual hindrances of both popularity and financing, and any pretense of sanity gone?
Absolutely. I mean, you have a war that, in some estimates, is costing $2 billion a day. People should look at the work of Stephen Semler at the Center for International Policy or Bill Hartung at the Quincy Institute. They do great work looking at how much these war costs, how much these wars cost, how much the Pentagon spends, the corruption involved in all of it, the dysfunction. But yeah, the president put forward his budget for the coming year, and it's a $1.5 trillion for the Pentagon, which I don't believe includes the $200 billion they said they were going to ask to fund this war. At the same time, too, I didn't see what the request was for the Veterans Administration in FY27, but certainly for FY26, the Veterans Administration was appropriated or authorized $445 billion. I mean, so when you start putting these figures together, and then you start adding in the money for the nuclear weapons program at the Department of Energy, and then you start including things like you should, if you're being responsible, the amount of the debt that is the result of past Pentagon and military spending. I mean, conservatively, again, I stress this conservatively, the United States spends $350 billion a year on debt and interest payments for past wars, for past Pentagon statements, and again, spending. And again, that's conservative. I mean, we know that by 2030, the interest on the interest payments on the Iraq and Afghan wars alone will be over $2 trillion, just for those two wars directly alone. I
Yeah.
mean, so the cost, and then what do we see? We see the way they're going to do this is they're cutting programs across the board that are not military related, except of course for federal law enforcement, for ICE, for prisons, etc. So you have a militarized budget. This is where our income taxes go, where roughly 75% of it goes to the Pentagon, it goes to war, it goes to veterans for the past wars they were in, or it goes to federal law enforcement and prisons for ICE. That's where about three quarters of, as we're approaching tax day, right? That's where about three quarters of that income tax that people are writing goes to. So yeah, I mean, and then when you ask, how come we don't have A, B, or C? What about education? What about healthcare? How come we still have communities with lead in their drinking water pipes? We're told, well, there's not enough money to pay for it. So this support for the military, this patriotism, if you want to call it that, this unflinching ability to rein in the military industrial complex, the Pentagon budget, right? This has really severe impacts on American communities because it precludes any type of investment in those communities because the amount of money being spent by the Pentagon, the fact that we run a deficit every year in this country, we have $40 trillion in debt, allows for an austerity mindset. So then, of course, we can't spend anything other than what we're spending on the Pentagon, and now, of course, ICE and prisons and things like that.
Matt Hoh, we just have a couple of minutes left, and you mentioned the Mad Court, which I take to be the United States Congress, so called. But if that institution cannot stop the weapons shipments, cannot do a war powers resolution, cannot stop the funding for a war, cannot impeach or remove or prosecute an individual such as this, should it not just be shut down? Under what description or analysis does it even exist anymore?
I mean, it exists to give the representative imagery of a democracy. It exists to allow for two sides of the same coin to yell at each other on cable news programs. It exists to give people some sense that they have some currency, some buy-in with their government, that there is some form of presence of what this country supposedly established 250 years ago. I mean, all these things, but it is, as you say, it is for the most part feckless, toothless. It doesn't stand on its own in any way that clearly separates it from the executive in terms of being able to carry out the affairs as it should. I mean, we have point after point, case after case like this, but certainly the idea that the Congress is just happy to go along with a war in Iran that roughly 70 or 75% of the American people are against, as well as say other things such as the inability to rein in secret police wearing masks, terrorizing our communities across the country, other than to stop paying TSA workers, right? I mean, it just shows just how just vapid, how superficial, how bankrupt the Congress actually is. And then you see that there isn't even an intent there because, again, in this incredibly unpopular war that is going poorly for the United States, that is causing great worldwide economic harm that will come here. I've been saying that I think 2026, at the end of the year, the most Googled word is going to be stagflation. You have a Democratic Party, the opposition party in the House of Representatives that says, it's more important for us to go on vacation to take our 2 week Easter recess than to vote on this war. I mean, so this is, I think, the point you bring up is very important.
There's
To
so
avoid a
many
vote.
leaders to
Yeah.
avoid a vote until they could get the vacation going, as they had avoided a vote until they could get the war started. Right?
Right. Exactly.
It's
Exactly.
like electing the Democrats in 2006, and in January '07, Rahm Emanuel says, "Let's keep this one going so we can be the opposition to it."
Right. Yeah, and that's a really important point to make because there are
30
political
seconds. 30 seconds.
consequences. Okay, there are political consequences for war. We've seen it in 2006, 2008, 2016. But all that does is change the color of the shirt the person is wearing in the seat. The wars continue to go on again because we have a war state that is the result of being an empire. And so now it gets back to the beginning of our questions. Why is this? Why do we have this war? And it's because the United States is an empire, and this is what empires do.
And we got to stop believing there's an opposition until there is an opposition, which there
Right.
needs to be. Wonderful work. Matthew Hoh is with the Eisenhower Media Network as a senior fellow. He's on the advisory boards of Veterans for Peace and World Beyond War. He's an associate member of Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, which we could use. Matt Hoh, thank you very, very much for coming on Talk World Radio.
Thank you, David, and thank you so much for what you do.
This is Talk World Radio. I'm David Swanson. Take action at rootsaction.org. Help end war at worldbeyondwar.org. Read or listen to today's Peace Almanac entry at peacealmanac.org. All past shows can be heard at talkworldradio.org. Talk World Radio is produced in Charlottesville, Virginia, and syndicated by Pacifica Network. There is no way to peace. Peace is the way.